rather stay here, I think. Okay, last one, and then on to the AGM, woohoo. Okay, we all work with risk management. So terms like duty of care, reasonably practicable, hierarchy of control, they're all terms we're all familiar with. But where did they come from? And what's with this strange title? Ginger beer, fireworks and a pregnant fishwife. Well, all of these things are part of some pretty cool old common law cases that have all contributed in some way, I think, to the work health and safety law that we know today. And it all starts with the law of torts, which is basically a fancy word for wrongs. So if I steal your air sample pumps or if I whack you over the head with a noise meter, I'm committing a tort. Now, the tort of negligence is probably more relevant to work health and safety. And then tort of negligence requires four factors, basically. There needs to be a duty of care, there needs to be a breach of that duty, there needs to be some sort of causation between the breach and the ultimate damage, and then there's the damage itself. And I'm way ahead, so this is awesome. Now, but unfortunately, the legislation that we have today wasn't around back then, so we didn't have clear definitions. In fact, up until the 1930s, unless you had a contract with a company, you couldn't actually assert and say that they owed you a duty. But things were to change in 1932 in England. A poor lady found a snail in her ginger beer, and she suffered shock and gastro, and she went to sue the manufacturer. But the manufacturer said, no, I have no contract with you, therefore I owe you no duty. But fortunately, the House of Lords disagreed. And the lovely Lord Atkin, who was an Australian, he said that clearly that a manufacturer does in fact have a duty of care. To provide any materials or to any products, they have to be, I suppose he needs to consider any health effects that might result. This was called the Neighbour Principle, which we still use today. So what is your neighbour? So Lord Atkin said that our neighbour is somebody who through through direct contact, we might reasonably be expected to consider their well-being because of our acts or omissions. But there has to be a reasonably foreseeable aspect of this idea. So here is where explosives fit in. Now here the guard helped a man onto a train. The guy dropped his carton, it exploded, and it injured a lady on the platform. Okay, the lady developed a stammering or something, and she tried to sue the railroad company. But it was held that her injury was not foreseeably associated with, oh gosh, okay, forget that. Right, this is our fishwife, okay? Now she tried to get away with blaming her stillbirth on an accident that occurred that she heard, she didn't even see it, that occurred on an adjacent street. She wasn't successful. Now up in England in the 19th century, there were laws on work health and safety, but unfortunately it wasn't until 1937 when a guy basically died in a mine shaft that a company was actually held to account. So the company argued it was the miner's fault. He should have spoken to somebody, he should have gone an alternate way. But our House of Lords said no longer, that's not good enough. So this is obviously progressing into the space we're in today. There's also a standard of care we have to think about. So if the hazard's higher, we're going to expect a higher standard of care, aren't we? And this came out of the case here where somebody was unloading a mustard gas and there was an incident. We've also got to think of reasonable person. So would a reasonable person expect that an employer should provide goggles to everyone in the workplace that might be exposed to eye damage? Of course they would. Unfortunately not in this case. But there's also got to be a causation or a cause and effect with the injury you're claiming and where this is coming from. So in this case, a worker who was a smoker tried to sue his company for cancer he later developed because of exposure to assessment, but he wasn't successful, he wasn't able to make that causal link. Now the eggshell skull rule is another cool phenomenon, and it basically means you take your victim as you find them. So if I take an asthmatic and go and throw them in an environment full of irritants and they develop something nasty as a result of that, I'm accountable. It doesn't matter that I didn't know he was an asthmatic. And in this case, a guy got some molten metal on his lip, and unbeknownst to anybody, he had some sort of pre-metastatized tissue on his lip, and he developed and died of cancer 3 years later. And the company was held accountable, which is relevant and I think a good thing. So there we go. Ginger beer, fireworks, and a pregnant fishwife. I hope you've enjoyed a few little stories as to where we've come from and where we are today in work health and safety law.